Welcome to Transformational Blueprints, the podcast that's here to tackle the big question. Why do so many transformation programs fall short, and what can we do about it? I'm Mario Michaels, founder and director of Synaxia Group, and I'm thrilled to have you join me. In this series, we go beyond theory, bringing you first-hand stories and insights from some of the world's top architecture and transformation leaders. It's all about sharing real-world lessons, sparking fresh ideas, and giving back to the architecture community. So whether you're looking to learn, be inspired, or stay ahead of the curve, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive in together. Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking to Henrik Magnusson about redefining the value of architecture by breaking down frameworks. Henrik took the long road to enterprise architecture, born in Sweden, but lived half his life in the UK, started out in systems engineering with his head in racks and sometimes in his hands when trying to recover critical servers. Now his head is firmly in the architecture space and the energy sector, thinking about how technology innovation can navigate the energy transition by companies and customers. As head of architecture, he guides the global implementation of all domains of architecture at Smartest Energy to align to an ambitious business strategy. He uses soft power and hard facts to make architecture relevant and to bring stakeholders onto the transformation journey. Also loves a good cup of coffee and does not take himself too seriously, which I'm sure you'll find throughout this episode. Henrik, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Thank you. Well, look, if we could just start with a bit of background. I know we briefly touched on it. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to sort of being where you are at the moment.
Yeah, so I my first IT job was actually quite late in my life. I was sort of 25. I did various other jobs before that, which are irrelevant to this in many respects. But I started as sort of first line support, worked my way up to second line and third line, and then sort of broadly did the systems engineering route. And I think that taught me a lot about operations of IT. And something I took really to was the solution architecture, which is really similar to systems engineering, systems thinking, and sort of translated that into solution architecture, which I still think is the most honest architecture that's out there. You're solving real problems on a daily basis. And from then on, just developing a bit more enterprise and strategic thinking, and discovered I was actually reasonably good at it. So
Okay.
Yeah, there we are.
Fair enough. And what's your remit at Smartest Energy? In fact, if we could just take a step back for those that don't know who Smartest Energy are, just could you tell us what they do and what your remit there is?
Yeah, so we're a B2B energy only. So we don't do individual households or meters, and we're sort of the fifth or fourth largest energy supplier in the UK by volume. We've been in the UK since since 2000. We major on green energy, so we are an on-ramp for generators that might have solar or wind, and we aggregate that and sell it on the open markets, and also sell other energy types as well. So that's our sort of supply business. And then we've got a very big trading sort of desk, an advanced trading desk that can trade energy and other commodities. And in the last 5 years or so, we've spread our wings and done startups in US and Australia as well.
Okay.
On a trajectory for a bit more global expansion, which is always fun.
Yeah, especially from your perspective. And your role there is head of architecture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Globally.
We cover all the domains really. So it's everything from enterprise architecture to solutions, technology, data, security. I have the operational responsibility for information security as well.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, look, we've got a question from the previous guest, and not sure how relevant this may be, but let's talk about your background. I think he came from a software engineering background, so and I know you're very much from an infrastructure. So a few years ago, he received some advice from a leader that he should really stay as technical as he can for as long as he can. That they regretted climbing the ladder too quickly. So assuming you can no longer code or be in that sort of technical area, do you miss it?
I do at times. Yeah, I think there's something honest about that, and I do often think back on those days with fondness, even though there was a ton of stress involved, a different stress than today's job, I guess. But I don't believe that there are any mistakes, and all of those sort of things we do that shape us really make us who we are today. And I think, as you mentioned in the intro, having a broken down server somewhere in the Midlands, you've traveled through the night, so you're standing there with a head in the hands, the customer breathing down your neck. It's the valuable lessons, right? There's something
Yeah,
that I've taken with me, and just kind of always fronting with positivity and problem solving mentality, I think is very
yeah,
important.
brilliant. Henrik, what do you think makes a great architect in today's world?
I think back to the previous question, I think it's someone who's willing to pay it forward, someone who is willing to take the time. There's a saying about pilots, and I don't know if this is true, so I'll caveat this, but I've heard this said about pilots that once you reach a certain maturity, you can only learn new things and develop if you teach brand new pilots. So I think
Okay.
there's something to say about people who are willing to send down the elevator, or whatever you want to call it, and just kind of take on new people, just really that sort of mentoring role.
Mhm.
Architects are seen as, the peak of some kind of career. I'm not sure I've peaked yet, but and it's just being willing to sort of stoop down and kind of bring everyone with you on the journey. I think also the future belongs to multi-skilled personalities. Someone who can really get to grasp with problems of completely different with different problem statements and in different businesses. And I think it's that critical thinking, holistic thinking, and really being a good people person. I think those are all qualities that we can't underestimate.
Yeah, but yeah, absolutely. Okay, fine. So there's growing fatigue around rigid frameworks like TOGAF, ADM, etc., etc., and a shift towards outcome-driven, context-aware architecture. Why why do so many architects feel frustrated or constrained by traditional frameworks, or this desire to always go back to those frameworks? And what's the alternative?
I think if we look back at the origin of some of the, or most of those frameworks, they came from sort of a really big consultancy background. They were done in consensus,
Hmm.
and I think we haven't, as a discipline, we haven't been served well by those not being adapted to local regional variations, right? So I think the best advice that I've got is probably just to break out the cycle. I call it smashing the frameworks. Clearly, is about adopting the things that do work, but don't use them out of the box. And if something looks and feels like a TOGAF diagram, I sort of come out in hives a little bit. If that's your workings, that's fine, but adapt it, make it look and feel like someone who's going to actually consume that on the business side or in other IT disciplines. And instead of thinking how something might fit TOGAF, think about the disciplines we got as architects that are evident in TOGAF, BF, and all the other frameworks. What's the approach we would take, and how do we adapt it and make it relevant? That's our skill as architects, is kind of the analysis, synthesis of problems, and what's working where you are and what won't work is going to be learning points for you. And
Hmm.
I think the EA discipline overall is sort of plagued by this. EA, what value does EA bring, or how do we earn a seat at the table? I think we need to change our thinking and sort of see it as one of the really core critical disciplines, not just in IT, but where IT meets business and strategic thinking.
Across the whole business, you're right, and leads me nicely on to my next question there around why architecture. Well, in a world where architecture must always prove its value, and every head count has to prove their value, right? But it feels like architects have got a tougher job because, there's no black and white. They've done that, and this is the impact it's had on the business from an ROI, like a software engineer might do when they're building a product, etc., etc. And then you've got the added necessity of guardrails and compliance and keeping everything within the red tape, so to speak, as people outside of architecture will call it. How does an architect move away from that ideology or that thinking and become an enabler of change? Because ultimately that's what an architect should be, right?
Absolutely. I think it comes down to finding the themes. So find the biggest themes there are. What's core to your business? What's really driving the identity of your business, and then start addressing those things rather than tinker around the edges. And I think most businesses nowadays are so plagued by red tape, as you reference. Are we adding to that, or are we actually greasing the machinery? That's what I think is a real test for today's architects. we do need governance. The how we do it, perhaps we can adapt that a little bit rather than come with 10 steps you must do and the architecture review board, the TDA, and all the other things that we do. Can we do them in a context where it makes sense and just really enable change? We want to be that bridge between strategy and execution, right? And if that takes too long, or the perception is that strategy is a multi-year thing, we'll never get there. We have to change the thinking around that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's to add to that is changing the thinking to become more of a business facing discipline, because historically architecture sat within IT, and people externally of IT will look at it and go, oh, they sat in the IT team, but actually it's more of a, as you say, business facing discipline, or it should be, and certainly at enterprise level, but arguably at solutions level as well. And it's about positioning that within the rest of the business. But then we're moving into pragmatic architecture, which is what it should be. But actually, what does that actually mean in practice to you, Henrik? And especially in immature environments or fast growing organizations where pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are constantly moving at a fast pace.
I think that comes to the nub of the problem, doesn't it? I think in a word or in a sentence, it's all of what you need and none of what you don't. So what are your red lines as architects? What actually needs to happen? So that's where we need to take a little bit of a look in the mirror and say, can we cut away some of the fat and trim some of the flair around what we do? Does it have to be as elegant and as elaborate as it makes that? Because most architects I've met, they're some of the cleverest people in the room. They're not always the best people to kind of lead the thinking, lead the narrative around their thinking. But there are some brilliant examples out there, obviously. So I think it's about starting small, adapting agile ways of thinking. There's quite a lot of bloat in things like safe frameworks and things like that, but I think the idea behind it, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And I think it's, so when you think about that, all of what you need and none of what you don't, you probably do need to break some things and some molds and maybe work in some ways that are not 100% framework aligned. And we do need to copy, but we do need to borrow, but not copy is my statement, right? Because everyone has a different starting point. So start with what's in your kit bag, what's in the business. Are you working in a really lean startup with lots of exciting things and not a lot of technical debt? That's a very different proposition from a more mature state business where this is the way we do things around here, don't rock the boat kind of thing. And I think also when it comes back to pragmatism, if you can present things in a way that you don't need to be an architect to consume it, i.e. it's relevant for the stakeholder, you don't need to know what the framework or the meta model is, right? We've all been in rooms. I was in a room with 4 people and there was 5 different opinions on meta model. We're brilliant at that stuff, but none of our stakeholders give a hoot about that, right? So we just need to cut through that and see what are the concerns of our stakeholders, get back to real requirements, adopt some things around MVP, and then just get that collateral out there. If it's not obvious, I would argue it's not pragmatic.
Okay. And we've touched on it around architects having to prove value to the rest of the business. We've spoken about pragmatic architecture. How can an architect influence a business to think and understand the architectural impact more intuitively? Because surely that's then where, oh, okay, right, now I get what you do, or now I know the impact you can have on the business. You get more buy-in, makes your job a lot easier. But that first step, have you got any experience or advice on how architects can do that?
I think we turn the question around first of all. So we're often obsessed, as I said, about proving our value and sort of proving our craft and our trade, because we often feel marginalized, in certain circumstances and things like that. Turn it around and say, do we understand what our key stakeholders do? Walk a mile in their shoes. If you're in a company with field force or a control room, as companies I've been in before, do you know how the control room works? Have you spent a day, a week, a month? Do you understand what they go to bed worrying about? And it comes back to that sort of stakeholder engagement, and there's whole frameworks around that. But if it's not at your fingertips and you're not worrying about the same things, how can you address them? And then we can be credible by using the same language, and landing solutions that are appropriate for the business. I think that's absolutely critical.
Okay. Now, in the previous conversation we've had, you've sort of spoken about how important sustainability in architecture is and how it can genuinely make a business unique in every aspect, whether that's the marketing, whether that's the talent attraction, whatever it may be. How do you go about building that into an architecture practice?
So I think we need to learn what's unique in the business that we're working in, what's value driving and what's not. And that's why I think disciplines like business architecture and the BizBoc are absolutely critical in that. So value stream is right in the center of how we describe the business. Capability, yes, as well, but it's a static view of our business, right? What's actually driving the value of the business? Also understanding what sort of operating model your business has is key in that. Sustainability, and I know you've had Oliver Cronk on in a previous episode as well. He put it much more eloquently than I do, but and sustainability, if I can say it, isn't just about the deep green agenda and the decarbonisation. It's also about social responsibility and quality. Learn what the things are that are unique in your business, and can we then use some of those metrics to evaluate our portfolio of technology and applications? Do they lend themselves to the kind of customers that we want to attract? Do we retain the staff and the talent that we need in our business? And can we run sort of application portfolio management to some of those same metrics?
And what metrics? You spoke about how important metrics are in application, but what, give me an example of a metric or three metrics that you might look at and go, right, okay, because of that, now I class us as having a sustainable application portfolio, basically.
So from an IT point of view, there's a number of them. So manageability, how often we roll code, how efficient it is, how many incidents we have, and things like that. And all of that talks about, how well conceived our architecture is in terms of its placement, right? But I think also, how well does it serve customers? Maybe something like net promoter scores. And that probably is a metric that penetrates through to IT, but there's probably many others that aren't. So speak to your operational teams about what products sell well or what marketing campaigns go really well, and we'll start gearing our architecture and our investment plans around that. Yeah, I think that those are some ideas, but there's going to be wherever you're working. Yeah.
Okay. And again, we've spoken about, the future of architect as a role. It's shifting. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It's no longer enough to specialize in enterprise-wide governance or technical design alone. There must be a blend of depth, breadth, using tools like AI, being culturally aware, being commercially aware. And I've had Stephen Marr on, who talks about the full stack architecture, and when I've spoken about that with you, you sort of rung true to you as well. What does that mean to you, and how does it differ from traditional EA roles or SA roles that you currently see?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the trend is such that we're smushing together disciplines. If you just think of, we had infrastructure and development as completely separate. Now with infrastructure as code, you get DevOps, DevSecOps, DevSec, AI, ML Ops, whatever comes next, right? It's a smushing together of disciplines. And us as architects, we have to think about our synthesis. How does it all work together? At the same time, each one of those disciplines become more and more specialized, right? There's an inordinate amount of research on prompt engineering or machine learning type patterns and things like that. So it's impossible to know it all. But I think depending on the industry, I think we have to stay relevant. We have to have the understanding of how the business works. We have to understand how the technology fits together. That's kind of our bread and butter. We also spoke about the stakeholder engagement as well, and sort of really being people oriented. I think there are definitely some areas where all of this comes together. So we have a product architect, so we're not really a large team, but it felt relevant, and it was a definition that Gartner came up with a year or so ago around a product architect, and their T-shape is similar to an EA, but they're deep in the product space, retail, MarTech, value engineering, things like that. So that's a good example of perhaps, I'm not sure it's a full stack architect, but it's a changing role of architecture, right? And also what I do, I've seen pure play EA roles and they can work really well. What I do in our organization, partly because we're not large enough, is that all my EAs are also SAs. So they get to work on both the nitty gritty, nuts and bolts,
Yeah.
RFIs, RFPs, assurance, design assurance,
Hmm.
sometimes writing the designs, but also floating in the EA role when required and doing the road mapping, town plans, etc.
And that's fantastic from their perspective because they're getting that full sort of breadth of experience. Fine, and I think this is where a lot of businesses get it wrong from a talent perspective. They look for someone that already has that, but by the sounds of things, you're bringing in SAs or EAs and you're asking them to do the essay, but all the the blind spot, so to speak, and giving them time to learn it and so on. That's brilliant because you are creating a future or a future full stack architect. But I think what a lot of organizations do is they want it here and now. They want that full stack, and they just don't exist. It's like saying, I want an AI engineer that has been working with LLMs for 15 years. It's just not the way it works. So, and speaking of AI, the reason why a full stack architect may start to exist and be more prominent is because there's parts of architecture that can be augmented using AI. How far can AI realistically augment the role of an architect, and where do humans still matter the most?
So I've seen some tools now that can build a whole EA repository with AI, just with prompts and using some example templates, etc. You could conceive not just a world where AI can create that, depending on your
Mhm.
industry and with some input around other enterprise collateral that might exist, but also the fact that you could have two two opposing views reviewing that. So you could have an EA proponent that kind of boosts the value and is really positive about it and kind of
Mhm.
spins the narrative around it. You can have an antithesis to that, someone who is really critical and in the sort of get both of those sides together, you're gonna get a really good knowledge artifact outcome. I
Mhm.
think AI can play a lot of strings in that orchestra. What it can't do is then land it with people and make it embedded, right? We
Yeah.
need we need people who are highly skilled in that and highly sort of trained. And architecture, I believe, is still a craft.
Mm.
I'm reminded by Tom Graves, that some might know, has written a few good books on EA. He compares it to a carnival. So before the carnival, you got all the plans for it. You got the stalls, you got the setup, you got
Mhm.
the funding of it, and the revenue model that you're going to have
Yeah.
around it. It doesn't compare to the actual carnival where people
Mm.
meet and you got
Yeah.
jubilation. You might have disappointment. You've got new connections. You got culture. You got fun. And for me, that is, the map is not the territory. We have to bring that to life a lot more than I think most architects, including myself, do. We're really good at that sort of knowledge artifact crafting, and that's where I think AI might help augment or even overtake us.
Yeah.
But it's about bringing it to life and really sustaining transformational change where we can really help.
It's effectively about, in its crudest sense, is figuring out how the business makes money and what customers actually value, and then work it back from there. And that sounds really, really basic, but I reckon if you were to survey a bunch of architects and a bunch of businesses, the architects would say, "Yeah, we do that," and the business would say,
Yeah,
"Our architecture team don't do that."
yeah,
Yeah, so okay, and it's about becoming, and you touched on it, to be what it will do. It will take away a load of tasks that take time to allow the architect to go and become fully embedded, become
yeah,
consultative, become advisors to the business ultimately,
yeah.
which is where it's going to go. And it's time for architecture now to evolve into a more dynamic, cross-functional blend of business architecture, product thinking, and engineering, right?
Absolutely, I think so. Otherwise, we risk becoming an irrelevance, right? And especially if we become detached from how the business makes money, we're actually reinforcing the walls of our own silo. or padding the walls of our cell, as I like to call it.
Yeah.
And we just end up tinkering around the sides, and it doesn't land right. The business messaging doesn't land.
Yeah. Okay. Talk about AI. You got M&A. You got constant disruption. You got the complexity crunch, as Gerben Vida talks about. Traditional static roadmaps just don't cut it, right? And in a previous conversation, you've mentioned town plan approach to architecture, and you mentioned it just then again with your EAs and your ESAs, if we want to call them that. How does that reframe the traditional roadmap?
So first off, you're not going to find, well, eventually you will find a Gantt chart in there, but it's not focused on that as an artifact, right? In some ways, it's very similar to capability-based planning or capability-based roadmaps, but it brings out the whole gamut. So what's the business strategy? What are the capabilities? What's the maturity of our current business? What are the gaps that gives us? And how do we transition that? For me, it's just a spin on things that have been done before, but I wanted the business strategy to be a real North Star. So in some IT strategies that I've seen before or roadmaps, you can't really recognize the business strategy, apart from maybe it links back to a goal and things like that. We've got quite an ambitious deck where we've kind of really worked through it with business stakeholders about what's important, what regions are important, what products. We then map those clearly to applications and things like that, technologies that, and we've brought out the view of where the gaps are, where we're not really strong and what we need to build on. Because the business might think that they're full throttle on the strategy, but if the underlying architecture, as I mentioned, we're not a brand new business, we do have technical debt, some things aren't working as well as they should, they're going to really sort of run that railway across a bridge that's not really solid. And I think that's what it takes. The town plan is about this. So if you think of it in a council or town planning context, what's the services we're bringing to our citizens, and why does it matter to them? So I think it needs to answer those, not just be a statement of fact.
But how does that change as, an acquisition takes place, or I don't know, new tool, or we've pivoted to go down to this market, etc., etc. Is it elastic enough to absorb those unexpected changes?
Yeah, I mean, unexpected changes are just that, right? So you have to have enough inertia in the team, and you can't get upset when the business are trying to do new things. At the same time, I think we can be a conscience or a mirror as well that says, well, we've done the reverse roadmap mapping, and the things you put on the roadmap that just don't make sense in a strategic context, please explain, right? Because otherwise the strategy isn't a real one. So I think it has to be elastic and malleable enough to be able to be kept alive. It has to be a live artifact, right? But it's that sort of trajectory and traceability back to the North Star that it's really, really key. And you're right about mentioning M&As, because that's something that we're considering in our business at the moment. And we're a small business. M&A becomes a huge project for us. I've been speaking to some insurance businesses where they do 50 M&As per year. It's BAU activity. But for us, it won't be. So it will be disruptive. Of course, it will be. As long as we keep the toys firmly in the pram, be the adults in the room, kind of think, what does this do? Another aspect to the town planning and sort of the resilience is also mapping out the maturity of a business area. So maturity of how we manage our IT, but also what's the maturity of the processes? Because you think that you're going to land an amount of change in an area that's really immature, that might cause some problems and some risks coming up, right? So again, it's about us having that 360-degree view.
And why is it so important? You're right about the 360-degree view from the inside, but also it's equally as important for the business to understand that 360-degree view, right, as well. So why is it so important to ground those architectural decisions in business strategy, and how do you make that alignment visible externally from the architecture team?
Well, I think every decision And I'm obsessed by decisions, writing them down, doing the options analysis, because I won't remember 6 months from now why we did it, decision X or decision Y. I think every decision takes you closer or further away from strategy, right? And that's why it's so important. So every decision needs to be scored against your principles or against your strategic trajectory. And of course, not everything's going to be aligned. No roadmap or transformation is linear, but you have to roll with those bumps. And if you're incurring technology debt, make sure you record it and make sure you make people aware that there might be some hidden gremlins here, right? But as I said, let's not get bent out of shape over it. The business still have an operation to run, and especially in energy and many other heavily regulated industries, we constantly get these curveballs, right? And it's important to keep that traceability. We did X because of conditions Y. There's just no way around it.
Okay. We're going to move on to our quickfire questions. Now, the first question I always ask is, what do you expect to be a game changer from a technology perspective in 2025? We're halfway through 2025, and the theme has been AI. So what I want to do is add an extra caveat to that of what AI tool or technology has been a game changer or can be a game changer specifically within architecture.
Yeah, so I think
touched on.
Yeah, we use RDoc, for example. So AI is built in from the ground up with some MCP interfaces and things like that you can expose, and people can actually, I'm not sure it's fully built out yet, but you can inquire about your architecture landscape for a natural language. I think that's going to be a game changer once that catches on wider in the industry as well. Yeah, I mean, AI is a huge theme. I think some of the things that AI enable, digital marketing, I think, is right at the cusp of that. And I think there's two sides to it. I think it's going to really rocket boost performance of sales, and particularly products, and being able to cut through the noise and kind of get in what's really the value propositions. The flip side of it is you got all these companies working on tender submission and making it really, really fancy and using AI, but on the customer side, we also have them perhaps using an AI to interpret and evaluate those options as well. So you have bots talking to bots. So I think we need to think about new frameworks for how some of this kind of comes up. I think we'll also see some scares in this area as well. I mentioned I've got information security hat that I wear as well, and I don't think we've seen the real impact of the dark web sort of weaponizing AI in a way. I think we've got pretty close a couple of times, but I think it could be some significant threats in there.
Okay. What advice would you give a newly appointed chief architect?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think be worth more than your paycheck. Work to earn trust. As I said earlier, break the framework mold and try and be your authentic self and be authentic with your organizational culture and boundaries. Reinvent architecture and have fun. And I think that fun, is something that sometimes gets overlooked. I think there's a lot to say for passion. We are the ones who are here to help design the future of the enterprise. A huge responsibility. We have to match that with an equal amount of passion and investment and fun. So yeah, there's too many dowdy architects out there, and we just need to sort of grasp that a bit better, I think.
Okay. What do you think CTOs or CIOs, what do you think they actually care about?
Quite often it's performance, right? So the C-level roles are often squeezed from the board. They sit right in between that, and that gives them a unique position of kind of communicating those KPIs down the chain and make sure that everyone feels the pain or enjoys the joy of whichever way those KPIs are going, and sort of really drive that metric. I think they should care intensely about people and retention. I think architect is one of those roles. I think with this new age of AI, I think we're going to see a lot more social mobility, but I think it's up to us to really think about retention of talent and the right talent in our organizations as well.
Yeah. Okay. And if you mentioned what you think they think about or care about, if
Yeah.
you had one question to a CTO, not necessarily your current CTO, but if you had one question and it was in a pub over a couple of pints and you got an honest answer with no corporate, malarkey or anything like that, what would that question be? What would you want to know?
I think it would be something around leadership style. If I look in the diaries of some of my C-level colleagues, their diaries are nuts, right? Even worse than mine. So it's about how do you balance that and bringing it back to the people aspect. How do you make time for people? Do you make time for culture? Do you make time for making an example of the right behaviors? For me, that would probably be something I would ask.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we started off with the question from the previous guest, Henrik. What's your question for the next guest?
My question would be, what would make an architecture team so good they can't be ignored? And how does a leader enable that? I think that would be an interesting question.
I absolutely love that question. Cannot wait to hear the answer to that. Well, sadly, Henrik, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for an excellent episode. It's been really interesting and great to chat with you about, well, an array of things, but really redefining the value of architecture, breaking down the frameworks and a new way of road mapping. So look, very insightful. Thank you very much for your time and for an excellent episode.
Thank you very much.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Transformational Blueprints. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found plenty of insights and takeaways to fuel your journey. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could share it, leave a review, or give us a like. It helps us reach more people in the industry who can benefit from these conversations. Don't forget to follow Synaxia Group on LinkedIn to stay updated on new episodes. The links are in the show notes. Join us next time for more tips, strategies, and stories from some of the brightest minds in technology and transformation. Until then, take care and keep transforming.